FastAPI makes it quicker and easier to develop APIs with Python. Tommy will show you how it works in this course.
Hey guys, welcome to this FastAPI crash course. FastAPI is a modern, fast, and high-performance web framework for building APIs with Python. In this video, I will show you what you need to get started working with FastAPI. FastAPI also has a very good and easy to follow documentation, which I can also recommend, and it is also a great framework for building web applications with Python. During this tutorial, there are some tips and keynotes that you might want to take down, but I already did this for you, so I made a FastAPI cheat sheet in which you can download for free using the link in the description below. And if you like more tutorials like this, don't forget to check out my channel at Code with Tommy, where I teach more on Python and web development in general. The only requirement for this tutorial is that you have the basic knowledge of Python and you have Python installed on your computer with a minimum version of 3.6 or higher. Having all this said, let's dive straight into this video. So the first thing we're going to be talking about is how we're going to install FastAPI. Now, to install FastAPI on your computer, on your laptop, is very easy because FastAPI is a Python framework. So we're going to use the Python package manager, which is pip. So you can just open your command prompt if you're on a Windows, or if you're on a Mac, open your terminal, and we can just type Python -m pip install FastAPI. Now it's very easy. This is just the command line you need to install FastAPI. You can also do the normal way like pip install FastAPI, or if you're on Mac, you can do pip3 install FastAPI, just the normal installation command lines. So I just like using Python -m just personally, but you can install it anyways. So that is running, and as you can see, it says requirement already satisfied. Now if you work with Python, you know that this means that I already have this particular library installed on my computer. So because I have it installed, it's not going to go ahead and install that again. So let me just type CLS to clear that up. So what that did was it installed FastAPI. So if you don't have FastAPI installed, it should go ahead and download some files, and not just only FastAPI, some other stuff that you're going to use later like typing and some other libraries. It's going to install that along. And there's one more thing we need to install. So let's say pip install uvcon. Now the reason why we say pip install uvcon, this uvcon is what we're going to use to run our web server. Now if you work with other libraries like for example Django, you know that Django, you don't need to install any external thing to run it on your web server. Once you just type a command line, if you have Django installed, it's going to run it on web server. But FastAPI is totally different, because working with FastAPI is a very light library, so you need like an external library just to run that file on the web server. So this uvcon is going to allow us to run our FastAPI project or file on the web server. So once I press enter now, I should also be expecting requirement already satisfied because I have this particular library installed. So as you can see, it tells me requirement already satisfied. So let's just close that up also. So the next thing I want to do now, the first thing, before I started this, I already came into my folder. I came to this directory and then I created a Python file named my api.py, and in my Visual Studio Code, I already opened up that file here, my api.py. So this is the file we're going to create in our APIs and running everything we're going to do. And what I just want to do is to copy this particular directory, come into my command prompt and cd into that. If I press dir, right now you can see that I have that file there, just to make sure that we're in that particular directory. And now that I know I'm in that directory, let's just go ahead and create our first API. Now the reason I just opt into this directory is just simply because when I want to run this on our localhost or on our web server later, I need to make sure I am in that particular directory so I can run the file in that directory. So all this is going to make sense later, but let's just go into Visual Studio Code. Now first of all, let's just import FastAPI. So we can just do import FastAPI, and if we save this and come into our command line and run that Python my api.py, So if that runs without any error or anything like that, so as you can see, it doesn't give us any error, any response. That's just because that's to tell us that FastAPI has been installed successfully. So let's just close that. Now let's just go ahead and create our first API. Now what we need to do to create our first API, we'll say from FastAPI import FastAPI. Exactly. So this is just to import FastAPI like an object. So we're going to use this object or an instance of this object to create our APIs later. So now that we have this imported, we're going to say app is equals to FastAPI. So we're taking it from this FastAPI which we imported. So we're creating like an instance of that FastAPI object so we can access this later. Now this object, it has plenty attributes like the get. Let me go into that now, but it has some other things that we're going to use to create our API later. So now that we have that created, what we want to do is to create an endpoint. And let me explain what an endpoint is. So an endpoint is one end of a communication channel. So that might sound complicated, but what that just means for an API, an endpoint in a URL. So let's say we have a URL like on our local host / delete user, delete-user. So for this particular URL, the endpoint is this delete user. So this is like the path. In a normal URL, we call it the path. Let's say we have something like amazon.com, and then we have something like just delete user or something like create user. So this is, we can say this is our endpoint. In a normal URL, you see it's a path, but when you're dealing with API, this is like our endpoint. So just have that at the back of your mind. And each endpoint, when you're specifying your URLs, they might like perform different operation. Some might just get a particular information, a particular data. Some might be to, like for example, this create user, the endpoint is self-explanatory, is creating a new user. So that means we have to post some data to that endpoint so we can create a new user. So again, you are going to understand this when we get straight into it. And there are different type of endpoint methods, but the core ones, there are a lot. They are not too much, but there are a lot. But the core ones are get, not this, get, we have post, we have put, and then we have delete. So let me just explain this quickly. So the get is used to just get an information or return an information. Just used to get or return a data or something like that. And then post, this is just to create something new. Let me put it like that. Create something new or create like a new object in the database. And then for put, this put is used to update a data or to update something in a particular object. So all this, again, you are going to understand when we are putting all this, using all this practically for updating. And delete is self-explanatory. It's just used to delete something. So as I said, this get is just used to get or return data or an information. Post is to create something new or just to add something new. Then put is just to update something that already exists in that particular database. And delete is just to delete like a data from a database or something like that. So now that we have all these known, that you already understand all this, let's just go straight into creating the real database, the real API. So now for me to create a new API, I'm going to do the @ sign app.get. So now as you can see, for this API, I'm using get. And according to the explanation I did like a few minutes ago, it shows that we want to return an information or we just want to show an information. So, but if I want to like do something else like post, put, delete, we're also going to do all that later in this video. But let's start with get. So after you say app.get, and note that this app is getting from the FastAPI instance, which is what we imported. We're saying app.get, and then we're opening a bracket, put the colon, and we'll put slash. So this is our endpoint. Our endpoint is just the home. When we write slash, it means our home, and our home can be like what we show when we just come to our home page, like google.com, that's the home page. So whatever our domain is, that's just our home page. If it's something like slash, let's say like delete, so that is another like URL. It can be google.com/delete, but now this is just the home page, just to make sure you get that correctly. So now that we have that, we're going to have a new function, and let's name this index or home or anything we want to name it. And then now let's just return a particular data. So let's say name, let's say first data. So what this is doing now, as we say, we are taking from the app, which is also taken from the FastAPI object, and we're using a get method, and the endpoint we specified is just the home page or the home URL. And then under that, we're just gonna have a new function. We can name this anything we want, and what we can just do is to return this particular data. Now this is just a dummy data that we just input, but later on I'm going to show you how you're going to use it as a Python dictionary. And yeah, normally when we're returning the data to be returned in or showing a response, this API or FastAPI uses JSON. But later also I'm going to show you how we use a Python dictionary and automatically convert it to JSON data. So for now, this is just a normal JSON data that is being returned. Let's save this particular file, and for us to run this and really see what we are doing on like our web server, that's when UVCon comes in. Let's go back to our command prompt, and for us to be able to run this, let's first make sure that we're in the directory of this particular file. And to make sure, we just press dir, and then we see our file there. That's good. So now for us to run this, we need to first have three things. The first one we need to have is the name of the file, which is my api.py. The second one is the name of the variable you use. Most of the time it's always app. And then that's basically two things, but let's just, since we know that, let's just run this on the web server. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to say uvcon, I'm going to leave a space, and I'm going to say my API, which is the name of the file. But now we don't write my api.py, we just write only the name of the file, not with the file extension. And then we'll put a colon, and we'll say app, and this app is coming from right here, which is the variable we gave to the object instance of FastAPI. And then we'll just put two hyphens, we'll say reload. So this is the basic command line just to run our FastAPI project on our server. So once we hit enter, that should, as you can see, it says UVCon running on this. It says application startup complete, and it gives us this particular URL. So this is the URL that says where we should go to see our project. I'll just come into my browser here, paste that URL, hit enter, and boom, you can see that I have name first data, which is exactly what we returned right here as a response, name first data. So this is how you can basically just have a very simple API. Now FastAPI has this very cool thing that I like, and most of everybody that works with FastAPI like, which is called the documentation. So it automatically generates this good looking UI documentation for your API. If we go to /docs and we hit enter, you see it says FastAPI Swagger UI. So this is just like a basic documentation for all the APIs you have on this your like website or like your API application or whatever you want to call it. So as you can see, it says default. We have from the endpoint of home, we just slash, and the function is index, which is right here. Function give it to it is index. And as you can see here, we're using a get method. That's what it shows here, that is a get method. So it just basically generates this like API for like this documentation for our API, and we can test our API directly from this place. So we don't need to use Postman or any external service to test our API. We can just come here, click on try it out, and once I hit execute and I come down here, it just gives me the response, which is name first data of whatever is being done here. Now we're also going to go complex more in the video and show you how to like manipulate all this data very well, but for now this is just the response that is being given back to this page. And of course, if we go to the home, it's still that same response. So to this point, we've talked about, first of all, we created our first API. We make sure we installed all our FastAPI, UVCon, and everything we needed. I explained endpoint, what endpoints are, and get, post, put, delete, the endpoint method. And here again, we created our first API. And I also showed you how to use the documentation on FastAPI. So that's basically all about creating and running our first API. Now let's talk about an endpoint parameter. So an endpoint parameter is basically used to return a data relating to an input in the path or in the endpoint basically. So we can do that using either a path or a query. So we have two endpoint parameters, which are a path parameter and a query parameter. So I'm going to show you or illustrate this right now. First of all, let's have below here, let's have a new dictionary. Our name is students. Let's just spell that out correctly. Students. And let's have a key with as an ID of 1. And let's also have that as another dictionary. Let's say name. Let's give it like John. Let's have the age. Let's say 17. And let's have the class. Yeah, 12. So this is just a basic, let me make that small caps. This is just a basic Python dictionary, and we just have one field in there. This is a key and this is the value. So what we want to do now is that we want to return the data of this particular student using the student ID. So in the field, like let's say slash, we can have a parameter like slash get, then /1. So once we have 1, it means it should return the data with the student that has the ID of 1. So before I get into this, let me explain what I mean by a path parameter more. So let me just come down here, and let's say I have a website like google.com/ and I have get student. Then this is just the basic URL to get a student, and it can just basically show me all the data we have in this dictionary. But let's say I want to get only a specific student, like this student which has the ID of 1. Then I can add another endpoint, but now this endpoint will be dynamic. It's going to be like a parameter that the user inputs. So it will be something like slash, then it can be 1. Then when we go to this URL, is the user that has the ID of 1 that is going to be returned. If it's 2, it's user that has the ID of 2. So let's cancel this and let's just go straight into it. So we have this object right here, and then what we want to do right here in app.get, let's first of all have a new endpoint app.get. Also we're still using a get, and this time around let's say get student. So now we have this endpoint name get student, and we'll put slash again. And now we want to take a parameter. That means we want to take an ID of what a user should input. So for us to do this, we'll use the curly braces, and then we'll say student underscore ID. So this is just telling us that student's ID should basically be collected. And now say Jeff, just creating the normal function, and we can say get student. And now remember right here it was just blank in here, there was nothing in there, but now we are collecting a student ID underscore ID, and this should be equivalent to whatever you put right in here. So that's what is just being collected, and we have to specify the data type of this, which is an integer. So the ID should be an integer. Now what we can just do is to return students. So we're returning students, which is from here using the student ID. So let me explain this one more time. What this is doing now is that we have this app.get slash get student slash, but now we're using a curly braces, specifying like a variable. Let me put it like a variable, a dynamic variable. So whatever the user input here is what is gonna be used to get the student. So def get student. Then now we're initializing that student ID, saying int. So we're giving it like a data type of int. That means it must not be a string or a boolean value. It has to be an integer. And then we just say return student. So we're returning the student with the student's ID. So what I mean by this, in a normal Python dictionary, if we just want to return this student, because it has a key of 1, we can say student 1. And this is basically just going to return the value of this 1. But since we want this to be dynamic, like we want it to be what the user inputs, we change this 1 to the student ID. That means whatever the user inputs, the key of that is what should be here. And note, let's say user input like 5 and we don't have that here, it's just gonna give you like data not found or something like that. So let's save this first of all and let's just go test it out. If we come back here and let's refresh this page, so now you can see that we have slash get student and it's telling us student underscore ID. So if we come here, you will see that it says student ID is required. That means we can't just test this out and say execute. So if we try this and execute, see it says that we need to input something here. Now if we input 1 and say execute, you see now that it gives us a response of name John 17 and year 12. So that is basically this one right here. So if we come here now and then we try to put something that is not there, like 3, and we say execute, you see that it says internal server error. That's because there is no data like that. And of course, let's just go to the URL directory directly. So if we say get student -student, then /1, you see now that we have John, age. We just have basically that data. We say 2, internal server error. Let's go back to the docs. So that's what the path parameter is basically all about. But we can make it more, we can add more details to it, or we can, let's say we can make it compulsory. So let me come back here and let's say we want to add more details to this student ID. Like, when we are serving this our API to a user, the user might not really get, like if we didn't name this student ID and we just say student, user might not understand what this is. Like, do you need to pass the student name or the student's age or the class or the ID? So if we don't have a self-explanatory name, we can use like something we need to import, and then that is going to allow us to have a description of it so the user can know what to input. So first of all, let's come up here and input path. So we'll say, okay, we don't need to have another line, we can just press comma and input path because it's from FastAPI, we're importing it. So now that we have path imported, well, we can just say student ID column int equals to, and we can say path. First of all, we'll say none. Now this none is so that if the person doesn't input anything, it's just gonna leave it blank, or it's not gonna, once it runs, it's just gonna like bring out an empty data. So that's just to like catch the error. Remember when we did it back here, when we tried to get without inputting something, it just told us that we need to input something. So that's just what this is doing. And now we can add a description. Now in this description, we can do something like, we want the ID of the student you want to view, like that. So now this is just the description we are giving it. And once we have this, if we save it and then we come to our code right here, and let's just try to refresh the page. So let's refresh docs, and then we say get student. So now you can see right here in description, it says the ID of the student you want to view. So it's just more giving us more description or more details of what we really want to collect. But there are also more attributes, not just only this. If we come back to our code, we have more attributes in this path. We have attributes like less than. So let me just quickly come down here again and explain something. So we have greater than GT. So GT, this just means greater than. It's self-explanatory. We have less than. We have GE, which is greater than or equals to. And we also have LE, which is less than or equals to. So this is just telling us, since we are collecting an integer, we can specify whether the integer we want to collect must not be greater than 50 or must not be less than 1 or 0 or something like that. Let's say we don't want our integer to be greater than 0, or we want it to be greater than 0, so it must be greater than 0. Let's save now. If we come back here, hit refresh, and now let's try it out right here, and let's say we try to use 0 and say execute. So it gives us this error, say ensure the value is greater than 0. So that's because we specified in here that we don't want it to be less than 0. It must be greater than 0. And we can also add 2. Let's say we want it to be greater than 0, but less than, let's say, like 3. So that means the number should be from 1 to 2. So if we go against any of these rules, come here again, hit that refresh button, and right here, we try it out. So let's say we do 3 and press execute. It's gonna give us an error. We say ensure the value is less than 3. But now if we do 2, it's gonna give us internal server error. That's because that data is not found. There's no data with the key of 2. But if we do 1, we have that data right here. Right here, we just go here, the key of 1. So we come back here now, you see that it gives us a data. So that's how we can just add more values, or we can add more values and details to this our particular API. Now let's talk about query parameters. So a query is used to pass a value into a URL. So it's quite similar to the path parameter. Let me quickly explain that again. Now in a URL like, let's say google.com/ and we have results. Now when we have this question mark and then we have a variable name equals to something like Python. Now in this URL, the query parameter is this search equals to Python. So this is just basically giving us like a key and a value. So this is the name of the variable that is being passed and the value. It's very similar to the path parameter. So right here in the path parameter, we have a name of student ID and we have a value of whatever the user inputs. That's just how it is here. Also, we can have like a URL, and then instead of having slash or something, it's still gonna be on that same endpoint, but right now it's gonna just have a query attached to that endpoint. So having this said, let's just go straight into using this practically. So what I want to do now is I want to create a new, let's say a new endpoint. I'll say app.get also, and then let's say /get -by. So we want to get the student data by the name. This right here we're getting by the student ID. But the difference between the query parameter and the path parameter is that in the path parameter we need to add whatever the parameter we want to collect in the URL, in the endpoint right here. But in the query parameter, we don't need to do that. All we just need to do is to come into our function, specify our function and say get student, and then we'll just say name is a string. So right here is very similar. You see in the path with this student ID is equals to an integer, but we already defined that student ID in the URL. But here we didn't define anything, but we are now coming into the function and defining it. So once it sees something like this, it already takes it as a query parameter. And then once we have that, we can just go into this our particular function. And now once a user comes to this URL and do something like this and say name equals to like John, we want to get the data that has the name of John. So this, let's do this now, and can use a for loop and say for student ID and student if students square bracket student ID name goes to the name which was passed, then what we just want to do is return students of that particular student ID. None of this. Let's just return data not found. So what this is doing is that first of all, it's leaping through all the values we have in this student. So we're using the key of student ID in this student. So we say if the student of this student ID, the name of it is equal to the name which is being passed. Now let me explain this well. So we are looping through this student ID we're looping through this student dictionary using the student ID. And this student ID is this. So we can name this anything right here. We can just say ID, any single thing we want to name it. But if I say ID, Python automatically see that as a keyword. So I'm just going to put it as student ID so it's original. So now we are looping through it using this, and we're saying if the student with this student ID, the name of it is equals to the name which is being passed, then we want to return that particular student. If not, just say data not found. So now to make a query parameter, let's just go and test it out. Let's come back here now. We should. Good. So now we have get by name, and we see here that we have name required. What we can just do now is say John, and once we hit execute, that should work. So as you can see now, there's name John because it gets that there is really a value or a data with the name of John. But if we try something like, let's say like Tim, and we hit execute, we're gonna say data not found because we don't have any data right in here with the name of Tim. So that's basically how to just create a very simple query parameter in FastAPI. Now to make this our query parameter optional, we can do this. So it's very simple. Let's say we just want to make it optional, like we don't want it required. If we come here, you'll see that it says it is required right here. So to make this optional, we can just say name. Right here in this string, we can say equals to none. Once we say equals to none, is no more required. We can go here. So come to docs and we say get by name. You can see now it doesn't say that required again. That means we can try it out. It's going to give us an error or something. So it just says data not found, but now it's no more required. Now that's one way to do it, but the best practice is to use the default optional method that FastAPI has for us. So for us to use this, what we just need to do, first of all, we'll come right here. It's very easy. We just say optional and then equals none. So this is just gonna make it optional for us. But before we can use this, we need to make sure we import that optional. Say from typing import optional. Now this is just to make it, this is the best practice because this is how FastAPI recommends it even in the documentation. You can also do it the normal way that I just said, or the other way, not the normal way. This is the normal way. So we can also do it that way to keep things simple. But if you just want you have a clean code and a more readable code, that's the main point. To make it more readable, we can also use this. So right now, this is gonna be like not required, it's gonna be optional. So now let's say we want to add another query parameter into it, like we want to have two query parameters. How do we do this? I'm gonna show you something here. Let's just have a comma and say test int. So we just have a query parameter of test and it's an integer. So if I try to run this, we should get an error, and I'm going to show you why we have that error right now. Let me come here, not here, my browser. So okay, you can see that it's not even going. If I come here now, you see that it says syntax error, non-default argument follows default argument. So what this is just saying is that we have, as you can see right here, we have name optional, and then we have test, which is optional. So Python doesn't allow us to have like an optional argument before a required argument. So FastAPI covers this, but Python doesn't just allow us, because Python is a language we're using, so we also have to stick with Python rules. So if we come down here, one thing we can do is to just switch their places, like change this and bring it here or something. We can also do that, but the best way to do this, so we can have a limited query parameters and have them anywhere we want, it's very easy. What we can just do, say asterisk, that's star, comma. So once we have this, we can now write it. If we have a default parameter or optional or whatever or required, it's going to work. Since we have this now, it's going to be able to take care of anything that comes after it. So now if I come here and hit refresh, okay, that should work. But let's see, let's opt out. Okay, reloading. Yeah, if we come here now, see, it's already reloading, and that should work now. Let's give it one more trial. Okay, that's taking a while to reload, which it shouldn't, but that's just basically how to solve that particular error of when you're having an optional query parameter before a required query parameter. So I hope you understand that concept. Now let's talk about combining path and query parameters together. Now sometimes you might want to do this, but most of the time you might not. So let's say you want to get two different values from a user, like let's say his ID and his name, or the class or whatever. We might want to combine a query parameter alongside with a path parameter. Now for us to do this, right here we already have query parameter of name and test. So let's have a path parameter. Let's also collect the student ID, the slash k slash student underscore ID. And then since we are defining or initializing student ID in the path, and we also come here and then say student underscore ID, and then we give it int, say comma. So since we have it here and here, that is a path parameter. But if we have it only in the function, that is a query parameter. So that's just the basic difference that you just need to take note of. So we have it in these two places, that's that. So now we can just easily test this out. Actually, even when we collect the student ID, we're not going to use it for anything here, because everything we're just doing is basically getting it by the name. But that's just how you can combine a query parameter with that. So let's come back here now. We hit enter. So if we say get, no, this is not what we need. We want get by name. We say get now, you see that we have name, test. We should also have student ID. So let's try it out and see. Okay, if we come back here, student ID. Okay, we didn't save our file. Let's make sure we save our file. Go back, docs, get, and now we have student ID, which is also required. So that's just the basic concept of like combining a path parameter and a query parameter together. this part, we're going to talk about request body and the post method. So the request body, this is like the information or data passed when creating a new object using the post method. Now to do this, first of all, let's import something right here called the base model. So we'll say from Pydantic import base model. So just to be more elaborate, the request body is like the data passed when you want to create a new object or a new data of this. So I'm going to explain this later, like you're going to see what we're talking about. You don't need to like know the definition or whatever that is. It's just to know how to use it in a practical case. So now that we have this base model imported, we're going to create a new class. And this class, we just want it to be similar to this student dictionary. And let's name the class student. It's going to take from the base model. Let's have a name. That should be a string. Let's have an age. Can use that as an integer. And then let's have a class. Now I would have loved to have a class, but you can see it's seeing it as a keyword. So let's change that to like a year. So the year of the student, and that should be a string also. So let's just come here instead of class here, so we can use like a year. So now that we have this, what we can just do, we want to create a new path now. But this time around, we're going to use a post method. So for us to do this, it's just similar, but we'll say at app.post. And now we will say create student. Now I want to create a new object of student, and we're going to take a path parameter of student ID. And you know what we do when we take a path parameter, we have to define that in the function. So create underscore students. So we have to define that student underscore ID as an integer. And what the next thing we want to specify is student. So this student now, what it is basically the details that the user submits. So you know that we want to create a new student object, but using this particular class. So now the details, let's say the details, the name that the user submit, the age and the year is what is going to be saved in this student. So we want it to be equals to this student model. So you can see that this with a small letter and this with a capital letter. So that's just to show you the difference. So this is like the key value. So now that we have that, let's just go straight. So we'll say if the student ID that was passed is in students. Now what we just want to do, we'll say return like an error and say student exists. So this means that if the student ID is already in students and this student already right here, then what we just do is to say return an error that says student already exists. That means they can't create the same student with a student with the same ID twice. But if that's not the case, you can just say student using the student ID equals to student. And I tell you that this student is whatever the user brought or submitted using this post method. So now that we have this, we've created a new object of a student, and then we can just basically return students of that student ID. So this is just the code we need for this. So before we test this code out, let me explain what we did in this code again. So what we're doing in this code above is that we are taking a path parameter of an ID. So this is the path parameter alongside with all the details of the student, and then we're using that to create a new student object. So let's just go ahead and test this code. We save that. Come here now. Docs. So now you can see that we have post, not get anymore. Create student and student ID is required, and you can see it says request body also required. Now that's what I talked about. The request body is basically the details. That's the name, the age, the year. It needs all those. Let's try it out. So we want to have a student of 2. So we'll say, let's just say Tim. Let's give Tim an age of 12 and say year 9. Now if I execute this, you can see now that it just gave me that response of what I just created. So now we have a student ID of 2. If I come to get by student ID, so let's just get a student using the ID. We should have that now saved. So let's say 2 and say execute. So now we can see that we have this Tim. That means it has been saved right here. But one thing about this is that it's saving it in like a memory. So if you refresh this page, that is gone. But you know, when you're working with like real world applications, you want to save like your database or something like that. So you can see that we created a new object of that now, and then we just use the get to get that. And if we want to create what already exists, like 2, and want to create it again, let's say execute, you see it says error student already exists. You can't create with the same ID twice. So that's what's good about that. So let's go back to our code. So this is basically how we can just use the post method and the request body to create a new object in a new object in our data, in our database basically. Now let's talk about the put method. As I explained earlier in this tutorial, the put method is used to update something that already exists. So to do this, first of all, let's have a new endpoint. I'll say app.put, and this time around we will say /update student, and then want to collect the ID of the student, so we know the student in which we are updating. Now let's have a function saying update student. So we also have to define that student ID as an integer, and now students, just similar to what we did here, so we know what we're collecting. Student is equals to this student. But now I want to explain something. So right here you can see that we said student is equals to student, but when we are posting a particular data to this URL, and we say this student is equals to student, everything has to be essential. That means all the fields in there are compulsory. So if we come here now and we give a name field and we don't give an age field, it's not going to work if we are using this student model for the update. So we need to create a new model, but this time around we'll make all of this optional. So the reason for this is so that, because when a user wants to update a value, it might only want to update the name and not the age, or only wants to update the year and not the name or any error. But if we are using this student class for the update method also, the user has to input all the whole data. That means he has to change all the whole data every time he wants to update something, which is not a good practice. So let's just go ahead and create class and name it update student, and that's also take from the base model. Same thing, name, but now we'll say optional string was none, just to make it optional. We'll do the same thing for the age, optional string integer, equals none. And then exactly the same thing for the class. So right here we are using year optional, and this is a string equals none. So now we can use this update student model as a reference here. So this is not student again, this is update student. Now with this, each of it is optional, so if a user gives only one value, the other values can still remain the same. That's very good. And now what we just want to do to say if student id not in student, we will say return an error of like this particular student does not exist or something. So what this is, okay, let me quickly write that. So that, and the student does not exist. So what this is doing is that first of all, it checks if the student id is not in student. So that means if the id which was being passed, so what we're doing is if we want to update a student, we're going to pass the id of that student, then whatever I want to update. So it will first check if that id is present in student. If it's not present, it will tell you that student does not exist. This student you want to update does not exist. At least we have to have a student before we can update that data. So we need to check that first. But if it exists, we can just do something like student id be equals to student, and then right now we can just return student. That's exactly the same thing we did right here. Student id, exactly. But I'm going to show you where the error is in this particular. It's not an error, but where the catch is. If we come near now and test this, let's hit that refresh button. Now you can see is the put, we have the put method now. And let's first of all, let's create a new student. So let's try it out. Let's start creating with 2. And let's say team 12, year 9. Now if we execute this, we have a new object or new data of that. If we come to put, we want to update this student. So let's try it out. And we want to update the student with the id of 2, which is team. But now we want to change the name to Tom, not Tim. And we don't need the age or the year. That means these are optional, so we don't want that. We just only want to update this. If we execute this now, you will see what will happen. So now it says name Tom and age null, year null. Because we didn't specify this, it says null. So if I come all the way to getting student by id, and I just want to get this student using 2 and execute. So what is going to happen now? You can see it doesn't even show us the age again. It doesn't show us that he's 12 years old or that he's in year 9. So it has been overwritten. So because we didn't provide this age and year when we are updating, it just override it as no. That means it has no value. And this error is coming because we just did student with that student id is equals to student. So this student is whatever the user passes. So since we didn't pass anything, it just updates that student that already has a value, updates it as nothing, which is bad. So for us to take care of this, we are going to have to do it in like a manual way. So let's come up here. We'll say if student dot name is not equals to none. That means if there is something in what the user passed, then that's when we want to update and say student id dot name should be updated to the student, this one dot name. This is exactly the kind of code we want to use. And we're also going to do the same thing for the age and the class or the year. So if student dot age is not equals to none, let's say students with that student ID, that particular student dot age will be equals to student dot age. Now for the last time, we're gonna have to do it for the year. That year not equals to none. That means you're not giving us an empty value. Then that's the only time when we now want to update that particular value or that particular key. So if you don't give us something, we are not going to update it. But if you give us something, we're going to update it. Then year. So this is just the code to take care of that error. So now if we save this now, this is very good because we've taken care of that particular error. And now let's just go ahead and come back into here, and then we hit fresh. Yes, good. So what we want to do first of all, let's create a new student 2 him 12 years old, year 9. Let's execute. So now we have that. Now let's come to our put and update that team. But now we want him to be 15 years old. So 2. And let's leave this name as blank. But now the age we want it to be 15. So you can see that now we didn't pass the name or the year. But if we hit execute only, so let's see where the error is coming from. It's expecting proper name enclosing double quotes. Okay, so it wants this to be in double quote just because it's JSON data. So let's do this and hit execute. Okay, expressing properly name in double quotes. Okay, this gives us an error. Enclose in double quotes. So let's see. Now let me tell you where the error is from. If you don't have anything after it, like you don't have another value right here or something, just remove this comma. So we don't need this actually. We should not need that because it's an integer. So make sure you don't have a comma at the end if there's nothing after it. So now let's hit execute. And if we come here now, you see that only 15 was updated and it's highlighted at 15. So only that 15 was updated. And we have team and year 9 still intact. So this is what we want. We can also do it again. And now we can just update that name. And we want that name to now be Tom. So if we execute, we'll see that we now have Tom, age of 15, year of year 9. So this is exactly what we want. If we come back here now and try to get student, try it out. So let's try 2. And you can see that we have the name Tom working perfectly, the age and the year. So this is exactly what we want to get. This is our main goal. And let's also come down here to the get by name and let's test that out. So let's try it out. We have 2. We have the name of Tom, and as I said, this can be anything because we are not using it. If we execute this now, it gives us an internal server error. That's because of course that doesn't not there. So let's see /2, the name of Tom and test 32. So the reason why is because we definitely changed some values right here or some code right here in our where's that dot get. So we can take care of that later. But now that's basically how we can just update some data in our database if we are using a real database. Now we're just using like a memory, or like, I won't say a cookie because a cookie is on the browser. We're using like a memory. So once we refresh, or like a session, once we refresh, that is gone. But now this is how we can just simply do this, and I hope you understood why we went about doing this. So if you read this code well, you see that we're saying if this whatever the value is not none, that means if it is not empty, then that means there's something there, that's when we want to update it. So I hope you understood exactly what we did in this part, and let's move to the next part. Now we are going to look into the delete method. So the delete method is self-explanatory, just used to delete a data or an object from our database. What we can just do now is to have a new endpoint. So we can say at app.delete, and then you can say /delete student slash, let's take the ID of the student we want to delete as a path parameter, and then define our function delete student. Student underscore ID, we want it to be an integer, that's what we're collecting. And now we'll check if that student ID is not in student. So if it's not in student, that means it doesn't exist. Then we just return an error that what you are trying to delete is not even in our database. So it needs to be in the database for you to be able to delete it. So error student does not exist. You need to create that student first before you can try to delete. But if that's not the case, let's just go ahead with our code and delete that student's ID from the student, and let's just return like a message saying that student deleted successfully. So now this is the basic code to just be able to delete data or value from a database. Let's come here and test this out. So now if we play around with the post, first of all we have to create a new object before we can do that. So let's say let's go ahead for Jerry, 20 years, let's say year 13, and now let's execute this. Okay, student exists. So as you can see, I pressed that twice, so that's why it says student exists. But if I come here to my get, so it had already created it when I pressed it the first time, and I mistakenly press it again. So let's say 2 execute. So you can see we have Jerry 20 years written. If I come down now to delete, you can see we have this delete function. Now that we have this delete function, is try it out now by just typing 2 and hitting execute. It says student deleted successfully. Now we might not know if they are really deleted. Let's just go ahead and cross check. So if we execute now, it says internal server error. That's because the student doesn't exist again. So if I also come in now and try to execute again, it says student does not exist. I mean, the student I'm trying to delete does not exist. So this is how we can use the delete method in FastAPI. So guys, that's gonna be all for this video. Thank you so much for watching till this point. In this video, we talked about FastAPIs and all the basics and fundamentals you need to start working with FastAPI. So thank you once again for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.